Welcome to part 2 of this Poland Riverside Cemetery virtual tour, sponsored by the Poland Historical Society. As I mentioned in part 1, I am Cook Fitch Kirtland, and I served as superintendent of this cemetery association for 32 years. I will serve as your guide on this tour. The Memorial Day parade and ceremony has been a long-standing tradition in Poland. It is currently sponsored by the local American Legion Post. Here's a program from 1925, however, that shows the program was sponsored by the Community Memorial Association of Poland at that time. After the Civil War, Americans in various towns throughout the country began holding springtime tributes to the fallen soldiers. They decorated their graves with flowers and recited prayers. The holiday was originally called Decoration Day. Memorial Day was declared the official name in 1967, and it became an official federal holiday in 1971. I believe I recall that the parade used to stop at the old village graveyard along the way to honor the soldiers buried there. The parade is followed by a program honoring our veterans at the rostrum across from the Civil War monument. Officials are introduced and a speech is given that pays tribute to Poland's lost soldiers. The high school band participates and a large crowd gathers to pay their respects. A trumpeter plays taps in the distance to close the solemn ceremony. This is the War Memorial in Riverside Cemetery. Inscribed on it are the names of those from Poland killed in the 2 World Wars, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Here's a close-up that shows you the names. Now next I would like to show you this grave. It contains the remains of Mary Kirtland, first daughter of Turhan Kirtland. She married a gentleman named Richard Hall in 1815, and unfortunately she died at the very young age of 27. Richard Hall was a successful businessman, but he also died fairly young at the age of 48. Now notice their dates of death, 1825, 1837. They died well before Poland Riverside Cemetery even opened. Now mysteriously, there are 84 graves like this, containing the remains of people, or maybe not, who died before 1865. The Halls left 3 children who went on to be successful, and the 2 daughters married well, both of them marrying attorneys who became United States congressmen. Later in life, they moved to New Haven, Connecticut, and were wealthy philanthropists there. Now, just to the left on the slide, and also in the graveyard, are the graves of Dr. Seth and Amelia Truesdale. Seth Truesdale was a classmate of William McKinley and also served as a captain of Company A in the 86th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He received a medical degree from Western Reserve University in 1865. He married Amelia McCreary in September 1865 and then practiced medicine in Poland. What do these 2 graves have in common? Well, they're both near each other in the cemetery, and they also both resided in this beautiful white brick home at 214 South Main Street. Over 200 years old. Later on, that home was occupied by the T.J. Mayers family. They are buried in the cemetery also. I have asked my friend Robert L. Walker, who lived just down the street from me, to tell his own story. My name is Robert L. Walker. I was born in Trumbull County in 1835 and later attended the Poland Academy. We built this beautiful Victorian home in 1875 when I was 40 years old. My wife was Almira Powers. I was engaged first in farming and then as a coal operator and also as a banker. bank next door here is the one that I and others built. Why, some people say that I was one of the richest men in Poland at one time. During the Civil War, I served as a sergeant in the Ohio National Guard. After moving to Poland, I became a good friend of William McKinley. In fact, I helped to finance his campaigns for Congress and for governor of Ohio. However, we had a parting of the ways over some unfortunate financial dealings in 1893 when Will was being groomed to run as the Republican nominee for president. The country was enduring a nasty economic depression at the time, and we had invested in a tin company that failed, leaving both of us with large debts. Vindicator printed the byline, "Both Mr. Walker and Governor McKinley are ruined." Well, political friends of Will bailed him out, but I had to leave my home here as I lost most of my wealth. Dr. Carson Justice moved into the home and lived here for 50 years. My wife and I moved to a home on Grant Street. I hear you now call it Botsford Street. During my time in this home, the famous author Ida Tarbell lived here with us. She taught at the seminary. She and my daughter Clara became very good friends. In 1913, the citizens elected me mayor of your village, partly because I did support the building of the trolley line here. I died on my birthday in 1919 at the age of 84 and rest here with my family. I am very pleased that my old home and the bank have been maintained so well over the years. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Robert. This 25-foot tall obelisk in the cemetery is dedicated to the memory of Dr. C.R. Justice and his wife, Bertha Long Justice, and also to her parents, John and Emma Long. It is the tallest monument in the cemetery. After Dr. Justice married Bertha Long, in 1896, they purchased the former Robert L. Walker home at the corner of Riverside and South Main Street. In addition to caring for Poland residents' medical needs for 50 years, in 1886, Dr. Justice was elected vice president of Farmers Deposit and Savings Bank in Poland, next door to his home. You see it in the background here. In 1883, Dr. Justice became a trustee of Riverside Cemetery and continued to be active in the affairs of the cemetery until his death 45 years later. He was the president of the board, superintendent, and oversaw the cemetery's daily operations. After his death, Bertha was elected to replace the good doctor on the cemetery board. And upon her death in 1951, Mrs. Justice bequeathed to the cemetery $10,000. That $10,000 was placed in a trust fund and held until 1972, when it was used to help finance the construction of the present Memorial Chapel. Thanks to Mr. Ted Heineman for the information on this marker. This marker is for the Reverend Algernon McMaster and his wife Elizabeth. Reverend McMaster served as pastor of the Poland Presbyterian Church for 24 years, the longest and one of the most successful pastorates of any minister at that time. The family lived at this home on Center Road, which we now call Riverside Drive. A month after arriving at the church, the session of the church decided they wanted a new building to replace a white frame building. This red brick church in the location of the present building was built at that time. An old schoolhouse had to be moved to make room for the new building. Reverend McMaster was pastor during the Civil War. On July 26, 1863, the congregation was alarmed when Judge Glidden rode through Poland, calling out the alarm that Confederate General Morgan was heading into Columbiana. The men seized whatever weapons they could find and rushed off on foot, horseback, or in wagons down the road to Columbiana. The women went home and hastily hid their valuables. News reached the marchers on the road that Morgan had been captured well over the county line at New Lisbon. The men gladly returned home. Reverend McMaster died in 1882. Here is a quote from his obituary. He was 75 years of age, and besides Mrs. Maxwell, leaves another daughter, Mrs. J.C. Brownlee of Boardman. Several years ago, his health began to fail, and since the marriage of his daughter, he has made his home with her at Leetonia. A man of strict integrity, a devout Christian, he was held in high esteem by many friends who will pain to hear of his death. The large stained glass windows in the front of the Poland Presbyterian Church were donated in memory of Reverend McMaster. Now, next to the McMaster grave is this one for their daughter, Mary McMaster Maxwell. She was married to Reverend Alex B. Maxwell. We owe Mary a debt of gratitude because on Columbus Day, 1892, as a large crowd gathered on the village green to listen to Mary deliver a talk on Poland in the early days. A copy of her talk was printed in this little booklet. It provides historians with many important historical facts about the beginning of Poland. This is the grave marker for Ethel Hall Miller. She was the author of White Saddle, a novel about a pony brought to Ohio from Scotland. It was hailed by some critics as a children's classic. She delivered many lectures on the art of writing and was first elected in Who's Who in 1940. Here's a picture of Mrs. Miller with White Saddle. She said about her writing, "I just write about things and people of which I know, and I do it in my own way." Later, the family would build their own home called Quailwood, and she wrote about that too. That home still stands just north of the recycling center on Klingen Road in Poland. After her husband, Messenger Miller, passed away, she married David Duff, who was a teacher. Here's part of her obituary, which states that she was a nationally known author. Samuel Kirtland Hine was born in 1867 in this large white Greek Revival home on South Main Street. The property was once 5 acres. Samuel, known as Kurt, attended Poland Seminary and became a metallurgist. In time, he became the superintendent and then the general manager of the Girard Iron Company. On his death, Kurt left 1/8 of his large estate to the village of Poland. It was to be held as a trust and to be used, quote, exclusively for beautifying and maintaining the old graveyard and the green given by his great-grandfather, Terhand Kirtland. In 1959, a village ordinance established the Samuel K. Hine Memorial Fund Committee to use the funds for whatever is necessary to beautify and maintain the cemetery and green. I mentioned a while ago that there were 33 Kirtland names on markers in this cemetery. Well, the Cover family name appears 58 times. Now, of course, the last time I checked, the name Smith was visible on exactly 100 different markers. A.B. Cover was a grocer who opened stores in more than one location with his partner, Calvin Haynes. This store was on the corner of College Street and South Main. The home to the left was the Cover home for a while and had earlier been the home of the McKinley family. Margaret Cover wrote an informative historical booklet on life in Poland called Through the Years. This large monument honors the memory of the William and Mary Logan family. The Logans were charter members of the Poland Methodist Episcopal Church, started in 1834. In fact, William Logan was a carpenter and contractor and built the first two frame churches located where the Chase Bank is today. This is the church where the McKinley family worshiped. This is the home that William Logan and his family lived in on North Main Street, built around 1850. The property was originally 11 acres and included the lot now occupied by the Becker Funeral Home. Many church and social activities were held in the Logan home. A news article from 1878 reads, "On Wednesday, Mr. William Logan, Esquire, and Mary McNabb celebrated the 50th anniversary of their marriage at their residence in Poland. Over 300 guests were present. Both William Logan and his son, William O. Logan, served as mayors of Poland." This monument is for B.F. Lee, actually known as Bernard Ford Lee also, and the inscriptions on the monument have the names of his two wives. Lee was a businessman, a farmer, but most importantly an educator. He had built this female college, which later was opened to men in 1854. Later on yet, it became a law school briefly, and then later on, the Lee family home. Lee later got involved with the Poland Academy and the Poland Seminary School down the street. This home, of course, is on the hill on College Street, but the earliest entrance was from South Main Street behind Whitney. This is the marker for Walter and Martha Errol of the John Errol family. Martha wanted to move into the village from the farm because she wanted to be closer to more people. So they built this nice home in 1876 on South Main Street. Later, in 1985, it would become the Inn at the Green. Prior to that, it had been called the Tally Ho Tavern. This is the marker for William Hulse. Now, William has the distinction of being buried in cemetery lot number 1. That does not mean he was the first buried here. It's just that that's how the lots were divided back in 1865. William is buried with his son James. However, his wife Sarah and other son William are buried in that same lot, but their names do not appear on the marker. That sometimes happens. In 1870, the Holtz family lived on South Main Street in Poland. By 1874, William had bought 70 acres in the eastern part of Boardman Township, including 7 acres that were part of Poland Village. That would be in the location where the Methodist Church and Interstate 680 are today. On the highest spot of this farm, he built this magnificent home, known as the House of Seven Gables. It would be near the location of the present Farmers Bank on West McKinley Way. Sadly, in 1972, the house was removed to make room for a restaurant, one of several that actually failed at that site. The Poland artist Al Perella painted a beautiful watercolor of this home. John Nesbitt grew up in Poland Township. His father and grandfather were both carpenters, so John practiced that trade also until the Civil War broke out. In 1862, he enlisted in Company H of the 105th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, along with many other Poland men. We know that his company fought at Missionary Ridge, at Chattanooga, Tennessee, and afterwards followed the retreating Confederate Army to Atlanta. Recently, many letters written by and to John Nesbitt during the Civil War were discovered at the Little Red Schoolhouse, home of the Poland Historical Society. After the war, John Nesbitt purchased 8 acres of land at the south end of Poland Village and began farming while still working as a carpenter and contractor. He married Rose Logan. John Nesbitt was appointed postmaster of Poland in 1891 and held that position for many years. He was also involved on the school board in Poland for 25 years and served on the town council. After his death, the farm was sold and subdivided into 17 lots. John's brother James also served in the war in the cavalry, and he is buried nearby. Pardon me, but I would like to make an observation. Nesbitt is yet another name of a former resident for whom a street was named in Poland. I have also told you about names such as Walker, Lee, Hine, Cover, Duncan, McKinley, and Errol. They all have streets named for them. Yet there is no street named for the man that many call the founder of Poland, my grandfather, Terhand Kirtland. I say this not to complain, but merely state that I find that interesting. There are many interesting statues and statuettes in Riverside Cemetery. Here are some of them. I like this quote by Richard Bates. Cemeteries are interesting. They're worth visiting and they're worth studying. If we take the time to listen to what the stories might tell us, we have a lot to learn. Now, I have shown you some of the more than 7,000 graves in this cemetery. That is not in any way meant to minimize the significance of all the other markers. Every marker is important as a remembrance of lost loved ones to those left behind. This slide shows the approximate location of all the graves we have talked about. All of the graves in this cemetery, with rare exception, and the other cemeteries in Poland, may be viewed on this website called findagrave.com. Normally you will see a photo of the grave marker, and then many will also show family relationships and biographical information.